Far off beyond the lands of the thick forest near the deserts, there lived a king as strong and mighty than any other creature that ever lived on the surface of the earth. He had all the riches, adorned himself with shimmering gowns that laced with pearls. Added to this, he had the most fairest, voluptuous and beautiful maidens, whose eyes shone like clear waters of the aquatic habitats. His name was Takora. Every day in this town, whose echoes were blocked by the trees of the thick forest, old men, children, women, and even animals would gather at the forecourt of the palace, waiting to catch a glimpse of the elegant face of the majestic king, who perhaps was drolling on his bed. Once he emerged, the villagers will shower him with praises and remind him of his greatness as compared to the other kings. "O great and mighty king, your handsome and beautiful eyes are a light unto our world. My life and livestock belongs to you," they shouted. This will go on for about 10 minutes, where he will disperse the people after feeling full with praises. This bizarre activity was their norm. But the most heartbreaking thing was the failing village with each passing day. Their streams had dried up, their forest had refused to give lush green vegetation, and their rivers were void of fish. It had been years since they last sighted rain. Despite this, the meager foods they had were snatched by guards and fed to the king and his concubines. It was a tough time for everyone in the village. Takora was no different than a god. He had the most beautiful eyes found in history. Legend had it that his left eye was a glowing blue pearl that lit the village at night. Even the moon's brightness was pale when compared to this light. As a result, the moon refused to appear at night. The villagers, although with full found freedom, were held captive in their own land. They couldn't pass the thick forest into the neighboring towns. Many hunters exclaimed. Strange sightings and mysterious encounters left them paralyzed for days. Beyond the confines of the forest, the birds chipped. The nearing streams glided softly onto the pebble banks and merged into the big dam. This big dam was the source of light for the neighboring town known as the city. Unlike the village of King Takora, people from all walks of life could be seen, especially in the bustling markets that displayed an array of colorful fruits and vegetables, along with very exquisite clothes and shoes in rooms known as stores. In this part, food was abundant, but people had to work tirelessly for it. The people here were called civilized. In this civilized world, no one had to please a particular person. People didn't know how to live in unity, and the more surprising part is you have to fend for yourself. A tedious work under the hot, scorching sun can only earn you one square meal. As a result of this, people as young as 7 years indulged in very dubious ways to make ends meet. In the corner of that bustling crowd was a strong, muscular, and strikingly handsome young man known as Amos. His physique has earned him more name than a one square meal. Every day, he would walk under the blazing sun pulling a rickshaw just to make a merger income at the end of the day. His ultimate goal was his failing and dying grandmother, who was bedridden and eagerly waiting for her time of demise. To Amos, proper healthcare was possible with more money, and that's what he sought for. After 1.5 years of toiling on the streets of the market square, he finally made enough income. Because of the eavesdroppers who spread rumors than a bird, he woke his grandmother at midnight, saying in a soft voice, "Bibi, I have toiled a full 1.5 years around the sun. Finally, the gods have answered my prayers. I've gathered just as much as enough to enroll you in a hospital where you can receive proper health care and once again stand on your feet." Bibi, on the other hand, refused the offer and proceeded to tell Amos about a dark secret she had been holding for a long time. Apparently, Bibi had a hole in her heart. This explained why she never wore revealing clothes. The hole, unlike any other, had a treasure of a blue luminous pearl concealed inside. However, the treasure was stolen in an unsuspecting turn of events. As Bibi laid down on her tarted mat, feeble and weak, she said, "My son, forgive my dark secret, for you were too young to be told. Now as I look at you as a young man, I'm more convinced you need to hear me out." Bibi's daughter and Amos' mother traded in a town set 7 miles beyond the Great Dam. It was a thick forest whose confines were bounded by thick trees. One day after her daughter travelled for her usual trade, she never came back. She only came back after 9 months with a baby boy. Because Bibi's motherly instincts kicked in, she accepted her daughter, fed and clothed her like a just-delivered mother. But despite all this, she spent about a week and suddenly disappeared, leaving behind Amos. The next day after her departure, Bibi realized the pearl in her heart was gone. Her daughter had taken it in her sleep and disappeared into an unknown land. She cried and pleaded to the gods to get it back. It was at this time that she saw in her visions that her daughter had been lured by a king far off in a distant land to get the pearl for him. In return, he would make her the only queen in the land, and kings far and near will admire her beauty. However, after he got the pearl, he summoned her to his guards, and she was immediately executed. The pearl from reaching the hands of thieves, he removed his right eye and instead replaced it with the pearl, which shone far better than the moon at night. Amos was astonished. He couldn't believe his ears. Why was Bibi telling him this now? Not long after, the old woman gave up her ghost. The sudden departure of Bibi left Amos so depressed that he lost the strength to go back into the markets and pull the rickshaw. Bibi lived with a chronic sickness for 25 whole years, but even with that, she worked hard to put food on his table till he grew up to become a man. Deep into the night, he woke up and sat on his bed, thinking about a grateful way he could honor Bibi's death. Suddenly, he stood up, packed a few supplies into his backpack, and set off into the busy streets that had died out due to the night's darkness. Just as Bibi had described, he went beyond the dam past streams and rivers, and after 2 days, he suddenly stopped. Before him was the great and luxurious forest Bibi had talked about. "I'm certainly sure I know not where I am, but I strongly believe I'm very close to the village that holds the existence of the king, my father, whose eye socket holds Bibi's pearl," he whispered. He saw a small clearing under a tree and decided to rest because he was so exhausted from the journey. Right after his bottom touched the ground, a creaking sound was heard, followed by a net that sprang from beneath and clasped onto his body. He felt his body slowly lifted onto the tree branch. This wasn't any paranormal effect. He had been trapped. Armed men 3 times the size of his body carried him onto their shoulders and marched further, thick into the forest. Frightened and exhausted, he passed out. He arose to the sound of a bleating sheep licking his lips as he laid helpless in front of a throne. Seated inside was what looked like a deity, dark and muscular, with one eye shimmering like a night diamond. He instantly recognized him as his father, the king who had lured his mum to steal Bibi's pearl. Even with this shocking revelation, he controlled himself. "My king, we saw this man trespassing onto our land. He must be thrown into the dungeons for the hyenas to feed on his flesh immediately," one guard shouted angrily. However, Amos wasn't ready to be turned into a feast for some hungry wild animals. He pleaded for his life and promised to show the king some artifacts never seen on the land. Out of his backpack, he brought out his smartphone, a mirror, some sugar, and a pack of sweets, and presented it to the king as a token. After moments of sheer determination in forcing the king to taste the sweets and see his reflection on the mirror, he proclaimed Amos as a god. "This stranger has shown us more than our ancestors. He possessed the gifts to deliver something more sweet than honey. He made me see my majestic face in a plate. He must be a god. Take him to the courts of the finest rooms in the palace and adorn him with the most expensive cloths and jewels. the king said softly. Within days, Amos had become the king's favorite friend, ignoring all the elders and making them cast angry glances at Amos. He ate with the king and told him stories about the luxuries in the city. He showed him stock images about rich buildings and expensive cars, and lied that he was the ruler of all, recognizing the king as the one that stole and killed his mother after she brought him Bibi's pearl. He had a sinister plan all along. His plotting to take it out and return it to its rightful place was cunning, but yet very intriguing. One morning after a feast with a king, he went into his chambers and looked straight into his eyes with something sinister hiding under his enigmatic smile. He chided, "My lovely king, I hate to make you feel proud, but in the land of the mighty gods, everyone praises and worships you. Before my coming, they all convinced me to tell you to come for a visit. I hesitated, but in return, I told all my folks to make you their leader and own the keys to the palace made of pure emeralds. Inside the palace are more food than you could eat, and more concubines than you can sleep with." After Amos' request, Takoras's face beamed with smiles and enlightenment. He wanted to take this step more quickly than imagined. He asked the way forward, and Amos replied saying he must take 2 pieces of a secret sweet he had brought along before midnight. Right after this, he will become unconscious, but must inform his tribe to bury him 6 feet under the ground and cover it with a heap of sand built exactly like the shape of a castle. This will serve as his initial teleportation to the land of great gods, where gold falls instead of rain. No one must open him up to see his condition, else he will be teleported back to his village and fall sick for 3 days, after which you will die with a decomposed head, heart, and groin. Takora immediately agreed. The sweets were poison laced with sugar. This was Amos' recipe for vanquishing the king. Around that night, he summoned all his people and told them he had a great journey to take in, that he might take very long to return again, but Amos would take over his throne. Relating to this, he simply called his guards and elders and made them dig a tunnel. Similarly, he made them swear to never open the tunnel after his sleep. They agreed. Around midnight, the process had been completed and the villagers woke up to a new king. Amos had his own sinister way of getting hold of the pearl and promised to send it to his grandmother's grave. His rules were different. The villagers loved him within the first 3 days. They didn't have to wake up at dawn and wait at the palace gates before going on their daily activities. However, one day, Amos summoned the whole community, telling them he will be traveling for 7 days to complete a task. He set of his journey around midnight and gradually using his compass went to the city. He visited Bibi's burial ground and opened her casket. There he placed the blue pearl back into the hole in her heart, a place it solely belonged to. "Grandma, I promised to take vengeance for your suffering. Now here is your heart. Rest in peace." With a heart full of contentment, he made it to the village within 2 days. The next morning after he woke up from sleep, he saw the dead trees rising up and producing very green leaves and ripe foods. Their forest was coming back to life, and their streams and rivers were floating with all sizes of fishes. People had more foods than they can harvest, and the lush green leaves gave off a sweet lavender smell. The village was back to life, and the villagers rushed to his palace yard, praising and worshipping him, for they will no longer die of hunger. He looked up to the sky and saw an image of his grandmother looking down at him with her teeth glistening like pearl as it faded into thin air. His mission had been accomplished, and it was just too easy. Be sure to subscribe and leave a like for more stories like this. Thank you.